Okay, I have a lot more to say. What I said in part one of this video might sound pretty cool, bit cruel. It might sound like I'm attacking disabled people, but what I believe is happening is that the government, or whoever that woman is, she is focusing and thinking about the people that are actually disabled and in poverty, and she is then clumping them with a whole bunch of people who are claiming disability benefits, because I do not know who is claiming disability benefits. Now, if the people who are claiming disability benefits are literally people who cannot afford the rent, cannot afford to, to eat, and if they're literally living in poverty because they can't get a job because of their circumstance, then then they deserve help, definitely. But from what I am hearing, or from the few experiences that I've heard of people who are claiming disability benefits, they're not claiming disability benefits because they're actually disabled. They are claiming disability benefits because they just are weak, or they just have autism, or they not autism that's noticeable, but just sort of mild cases of autism. Mental disorders are very changeable, and they can be severe, and they can be light, and they can also be just stupidity as well, and there are all sorts of different types, and therefore I feel like, and a lot of people who are disabled and getting benefits do own their own house. Maybe they bought a house 20 years ago. Maybe they've inherited it from their parents, and they, have quite a lot of homes. Now, if a normal person found themselves getting into debt, or found themselves unable to pay for things, or wanting more money, a normal person would have to make the sacrifice of selling their property and moving down, selling their home, their house, buying a flat, degrading, moving out of London, moving to a cheaper area. A normal person would have to make these sacrifices. Now, why should someone not make these sacrifices, not have to make these sacrifices just because they are disabled? I think it's different though when I say disabled, because when I say disabled, you think about people who are stuck in wheelchairs and can't walk, people who perhaps need to stay in a home because of having ramps, or perhaps they've spent money on a lift inside their home, or perhaps an elderly person. Elderly people are disabled, a lot of them, and therefore there is, when I say disabled, most people's reaction is instantly the most vulnerable, the most fragile, the most incapable or incompetent type of people. But I feel like there's a whole different scale, a reality scale to this word disabled, because my sister has a disabled benefit, and she's not disabled. She's stupid. She's autistic, and okay, when you think autistic, you think of kids running around in circles screaming, and my sister was not like that. That was nothing. She was nothing like that. So your version, autism as well, can have like a huge, it can have one scale of being severe. I think my dad's autistic, but he's never got the test. Not very socially inclined to even get the test. He thinks there's nothing wrong with him, but if I ask him, do you think there's something wrong with him, he gives grunts. Most of his conversations are just and he doesn't listen to what you say. It's very annoying. But there is different degrees of autism. There is different degrees of disabledness. There is different degrees of mental illness. And I think a lot of people, when you think disabled, you think the worst. You think the people that literally can't stand up. You think of the people that literally can't do stuff. And okay, I seem like I'm not disabled, so you could argue, why would I be claiming benefits? Well, because I spend most of my time lying in bed. I've managed to stand up and look okay for these videos, because I don't want to be looking like a vegetable whilst talking to these videos, but the majority of the day I do spend lying down, feeling like I can't get up, feeling like I have no desire to live here or be here, and I think the only real way to help me is to allow assisted suicide so they can get out. Okay, I hate this world, I hate the world, I hate the people, I hate everything about this world, and if I'm claiming disability benefit because of my mental state of hating this world, then I feel like I the only real thing would be assisted suicide, and there are plenty of people who are disabled and really disabled, and you know what, assisted suicide might actually be the better option for them, and they're not allowing that. Instead they're I don't know, trying to make people suffer by not allowing it. But I just, when it comes to, same with child services, you know, when you come to child abuse or child exploitation, sexual exploitation, you know, you often think the worst. You think of 6-year-olds, you think of, you know, oh, the Epstein files, you know, oh, 6-year-olds, when in reality, from what I've heard, it's 17, 16-year-olds who may be offered sex for thousands of pounds, which is very different to the sort of the darkness that people are trying to portray it. And it's the same with disabled. You know, you think of the worst, you think of the people that can't get up. And therefore, if I want to cut disability benefits, you know, I'm not saying for the people that are genuinely disabled, genuinely, you know, having problems, generally can't work. I'm feeling like, you know, there's I'm thinking of the 2 cases of people who I know are claiming it, and they're not that bad. They're not that bad. They're not, my sister's not that autistic. My dad's autistic. He's very autistic, but he can still work. So he doesn't need a benefit claim, and he knows that, and he wouldn't claim it. My mum, she's batty as hell. She really is. She doesn't even know she's batty. She doesn't even know she's mad. See, there's nothing wrong with her, and you know, I just, the amount of mental illness in this world is extreme, and I think the amount of people that would call themselves disabled when really they're not, when really it's just stupidity or stuff like that. And you know, I think that's one of the biggest problems, who gets it and who doesn't. And you know, even if you do have a missing leg, or even if you do have health problems and have to go to the doctor once a month, you know, you can still work. You can still work. You can get a prosthetic. That's a hard word to say. Can't say that word. Don't want to say it again. But yeah, there are things that you can do, and if part of the benefits means that you get a free free leg, you can get a free leg. You know, if that's what your claim is, then great. But £97 a week, like, how long do you get it for? Like, and if you take 3 months off and then start working again, you know, are you still eligible to claim it because you've still got that disability? You know, technically you could be earning a full-time job and still claim it. I mean, what the details, it's the details about this disabled benefit. You know, really, if you find yourself with a health condition and find yourself losing your job over it, why should you stay in an expensive house and claim benefits when you could downsize, get a smaller house, and then live off the £100,000? I mean, technically, if that house is worth £1 million, you probably only bought it for 500,000 20 years ago, or maybe even less. Maybe you bought a house for 300,000 and now it's worth 500,000. But you know that if you sold your house and moved into a 1-bedroom flat in the area, maybe, or maybe out of the area, you know, you could probably buy a £200,000 flat, and then you've got £300,000. Now, technically, you didn't actually make that money, because that money has actually just been made because you bought a house, lived in it, and the housing market has gone up because the bankers were giving out huge amounts of loans, but you become incredibly rich because of it. So who is claiming these benefits? And are these people claiming disability benefits, are they actually in poverty? I would describe someone who's in poverty as someone who feels like they don't have any money to spend, because someone who's living off £6,000 a year or something. That's someone who's living off £6,000 a year and has a cheap house. You know, I can't downsize. If I downsized, I wouldn't get much. You know, I'm living in Birmingham. That's one of the cheapest areas. If I moved to London, I wouldn't be able to buy a 1-bedroom flat. I wouldn't be able to buy a studio flat. I could not sell this house and go and live in London to buy a studio flat. I do have 20,000 in the bank, so maybe I could buy this house and then go and live in Hawley for all the money that I have. I might be able to sell this and go live in a 1-bedroom flat in Hawley, but I need a garden and stuff. But I wouldn't have any money if I did that. I wouldn't be richer, is what I'm saying. If I downsized to a flat that's maybe if I downsized to a flat in Birmingham, maybe I could free up a little bit, but it would be minimal. And plus I'd have to pay capital gains tax on this property, which means that I'll probably lose about 20,000. So yeah, turn this back on. I can't downsize because the property, this house is worth about 180. If I downsized, I might be able, I'd have to spend 20,000 on capital gains tax, and then I'd probably only have about 40,000 to play with, and 40,000 is not going to last me long. So there are some people who can't downsize because their house isn't worth anything, isn't worth enough to be able to downsize. But there are some people who are claiming disability benefits whilst owning a property that's very, very expensive, and they can downsize. Hence, if the government is going to claim that these are part of the people who will be living in poverty if, you know, they weren't given benefits, then I don't think that's the truth, because they could easily downsize. They could easily downsize, or perhaps even take a mortgage if they're in their last few years. You know, if they're an elderly person and you've got a house that's worth something, then you know, you can take out a mortgage that, okay, you might not be able to pay, but when you die, the house gets sold, the mortgage gets paid off, and okay, your relatives will inherit less. But why should a normal person who's working have to make these sacrifices, and yet someone who's going through health problems, why should they just get free money when they could easily take out another mortgage? If they've already got a very high mortgage and the mortgage company won't let them take out any more, well, then they can't do that, you know. So I just want to know about these disability claims, and I would like there to be a researcher to tell me exactly how many people that are claiming disability benefits are people that are actually living in poverty, e.g. they don't own a house that can be remortgaged or downsized. You know, a house that's worth £200,000, you can't really downsize by much. Maybe you can buy a £100,000 flat, but your quality of life is going to go. You're gonna lose lots of money on the sale. And if you're elderly and, you know, if you're going through problems, you know, I moved to Birmingham. I moved to a cheap area because I wanted a garden. The garden helps me a lot, and moving to a flat is not going to help me with that. It's going to make me feel even more like a pigeon. But yeah, some people have real reasons for not being able to downsize or take out another mortgage. You know, if you've got a health condition, you're likely to die in 5 or 6 years. Take out another mortgage. It's not going to affect you at all. You've got the investment. So how many of these people are claiming benefits? You know, my sister, it's because my sister is claiming disability benefits. She's not disabled. She's got, you know, two flats now from the March. She's been claiming it for 5 years. I made that mistake. She's been claiming it for 5 years, but at that time she had one flat. And she's claiming it because of autism, and now technically her autism is not going to go away. She's still unsociable, she still only cares about herself, but I don't think that it's a real mental condition. I think she's, you know, it's making me wonder how many other people are abusing the system, because I would say someone who's claiming to be disabled and, you know, forced to live in poverty because of not having any money, I think there must be loads of people that are lying, that generally do have money that they can free up to help pay for things. And I would like to know the real statistics about how many disabled people, I say disabled people because there's plenty of people who are claiming to be disabled when really they're not. You know, just because you have a mobility scooter, that doesn't mean that you literally can't walk. I don't understand why, you know, my other autistic friend that I saw, you know, he has something that makes him sweat a lot and sleep a lot. You know, when he comes here, he mostly just sleeps on the other sofa and I sleep on this one. But, you know, we just lie down doing nothing, and he's not claiming any benefits. Okay, he's got 2 flats, so he would think it's wrong to claim benefits. But how many people are claiming benefits or disabled benefits when really they don't need the money? And I don't know, but I don't trust that this woman is giving the right information. Let's see if we can go to...
Other countries such as France, New Zealand and Australia invest more in their disabled citizens. And yes, we do have alternatives. A 2% tax on extreme wealth, Just 50 families in this country own more wealth than half the UK population, and 3/4 of the public, according to YouGov, support a 2% tax on those with wealth more than £10 million. Yet this government will not tax the super rich. Instead, they are choosing to take from those with arthritis, cancer and chronic pain, just can't decide how much suffering to inflict. And while they squeeze...
Well, you can solve that problem by adding assisted suicide. You do realize that money is not going to get their problems. Money is not going to solve their arthritis. It's going to... arthritis is not such a bad thing, but if there are people that have severe chronic pains and stuff like this, you know, assisted suicide is going to help them, not money. But yeah, it's weird that there's 50 families in UK that are richer than the rest of the... Yeah, well, you're all living in hell. England's turning into hell right now, so I don't think I don't care. I don't care. I don't know what to say about that.
Most vulnerable, they found billions for war, billions to raise defence spending, to back endless foreign interventions, money for war, but not the poor. Mr. Chair.
People who are at war are the people who are living in are the people that are living in poverty. The people who are living in war-torn countries are the people who are most impoverished. And yes, death is what they need to back, because then they won't be living in poverty, because they'd be dead, and they could be reincarnated in the future, hopefully, when war is not going to be a problem.
The truth is this: Westminster is broken, but the real crisis is deeper. This is a government not out of touch, but also morally bankrupt. It works for billionaires and big business while turning its back on disabled people. It holds its summer receptions at MasterCard headquarters while disabled people are pushed to food banks. It impoverishes the sick.
Yeah, well, you do know that actually the bankers have been getting very, very rich out of this, and they have made the housing market incredibly expensive. Now, did you know that there are loads and loads of disabled people who own properties, and they've been owning properties for a very long time. Now, you know what, I would argue that actually the billionaires have actually helped disabled people more. Why? Because if there were disabled people that owned a property, well, their house is now worth a huge amount of money, and I think it's very unfair how they can own a house that's gone from being 100,000 to being 500,000 and yet can still claim benefits, whilst other people who didn't own a house, people like me, okay, I've owned a house since 2017, but before I bought this house in Birmingham, this house that was worth 105,000, before I did that, I didn't have any housing, and therefore the government wasn't helping me in any sort of way. And anything you would have done to help the disabled people, you know what, the billionaires helped them more, because they helped create a completely false housing market, so that now many millions, I don't know how many, I would love to know that, how many disabled people own a house. And okay, their house might have been cheap when they first bought it. Maybe they were working and then became ill and they haven't worked since. But how many people are living in a house and are now incredibly wealthy, not because of any work they've done, not because of anything they've done, but simply by being a homeowner? I would love to know how many disabled people have become incredibly wealthy simply by owning a home. You know what? I do not feel sorry for disabled people. Why? Because a lot of those disabled people have homes, and their home went from being next to my parents' flat. Was my mum's mad, my dad's autistic, and their flat was bought for £25,000 in Hampstead, and now it's worth about £1 million. So they have become incredibly wealthy through that alone. Now, if that is not a disability benefit, then I don't know what is, because my mum is mad, my dad's autistic, so they have been receiving disability benefit every single day of their life through their house that has been getting higher and higher and higher. Now, if some of these disabled people are disabled but have a house that's worth a huge amount, why can't they downsize? Now, I don't know the statistics on how many disabled people are claiming benefit whilst also living in an expensive house, but the reason why they're living in an expensive house is because the bankers have fucked up the housing market and made disabled people, or anyone who owns a house, they've made them incredibly rich. So you can't just attack the wealthy for doing this, because really the people that are actually suffering are the people that didn't own houses, because that was the only way to really make money, just owning a house, working, paying off the bills, using your salary, but finding that actually your house has been increasing in value a lot. Although I know a lot of properties have stopped now. The housing market seems to have stopped in some places. So I do know that the housing market has fallen in some areas, and because of things like service charge, you know, I know that my sister's flat was the new one that she's bought, you know, that one was actually sold. Someone lived there, a millionaire lived there for a very long time, but that guy sold the house for less money than what he bought it for, even though he was there for a very long time. But I know he did that because the service charge was very high, hence the profit that he was making on it was not very high, not very good, because of this extremely high service charge. You know, the governments clearly aren't stopping things like that. You know, you're not stopping £3,000 service charge. Look, council tax is about £2,000 a year in her area, and yet the service charge on her house is £3,000 more. Is the council really doing far more than the people who own that block of flats that she has, that literally do nothing each year, and even if they do carry out work, they still have the rights to charge extra for certain things. I mean, I think there's a lot of fraud that's going on, and there's a lot of things that the government could be doing to try and help people. But yeah, I'm not convinced that all the disabled people are living in poverty, because if they own a house, then they probably have done quite well for themselves.